guys are stupid. Seriously.
Wrong. Wrong. Wrong.
Seriously. Are they wrong?
I think they're wrong 100%. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're wrong.
Seriously.
They're always wrong.
That is absolute
Wrong.
Seriously?
It's so wrong. Wrong. Very nice words, but happens to be wrong.
Seriously. Seriously.
Wrong.
Hey, hello, and welcome everyone to the Seriously Wrong podcast. We are your hosts, Shawn and Aaron, the Wrong Boys, doing it again.
Yeah, making another cast, a podcast. We're here with a guest today. We have Sean Orr. There's two Shawns in my living room today, our podcast studio.
How do you feel about that?
I feel all right about it. It's pretty good.
Each more Sean than the last.
They're spelled different, so it helps me not to get confused.
Yeah, mine's spelled correctly, and yeah.
I mean, not to antagonize our guest, but as a kid, I was always confused by that spelling, the S-E-A-N spelling. I was like, that doesn't make sense.
I still
to
get
me.
called Scene, like if I go to A&W and like they'll write out Shawn and then just
Yeah, no, there's typically a lot of animosity between the different Sean communities about spelling and other issues that spill out of that.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad to see you two are burying the hatchet.
No, there was a conference back in 2017 that we all kind of came together and we were like, what are we doing, guys?
yeah, the real enemy is the Michaels. All the Seans are ganging up on the Michaels. Anyway, so Sean Orr is, I would say, a well-known local Vancouverite who is running for office now for the second time in the 2025 by-election. Sean is a writer, housing activist, musician, journalist, dishwasher, washes dishes,
Landscaper.
does landscaping.
I was a student. I just graduated. With distinction, I might add, from Simon Fraser University.
For politics?
Yeah, poli-sci and geography.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you're running for City Council with COPE.
Yeah, we joined forces. I ran in 2022 with an upstart party named Vote Socialist. The VOTE was actually an acronym, Vancouverites Organizing Towards Equity, I think.
Oh, really?
Not many people know that.
I
we wanted to get in the acronym game, I think.
Layers of meaning, yeah.
Yeah. So we did that. It was fun. It was a good introduction. We ran a kind of like upstart, kind of activist-y campaign. Got a lot of attention. Crashed a Vancouver Police Union debate where they made the unprecedented decision to endorse Ken Sim and ABC, and it's never happened before. And indeed, some jurisdictions in Canada don't even allow that.
Right, yeah. For a municipal police union to endorse a mayoral candidate, there's kind of like a conflict of interest there, having your police union be a bit too buddy-buddy with the mayor's office.
We also crashed the opening of Vancouver is Dying, a blatant propaganda film by Aaron Gunn that kind of demonized harm reduction and supportive housing.
Yeah, I think it's a cool way as like an underdog campaign to put yourself out there while also bringing awareness to some fucked up shit.
It was good. It was a good learning experience, I think. But now with COPE, it just feels like another level, like another step up. They've got the organizing apparatus there, and I've got a great campaign manager. I'm not sure if you've heard of this guy.
Yeah, I think I heard a little bit. I heard a few things.
Yeah, so I'm one of the campaign managers and co-chairs at COPE. COPE is Coalition of Progressive Electors, Vancouver's oldest left-wing party. Not that being older is better, but there is a huge record of success. My favorite example is in 1968, the first rent control bylaw was a COPE city councillor. It used to be that landlords could raise rents unlimited times per year as much as they wanted in Vancouver. In 1968, a single COPE councillor passed a bylaw to change that, and then the province took it up a few years later. And then now to this day, we have some rent controls in BC. That's like
the only reason that I'm in this apartment is BC's rent control. Otherwise, it would be twice as expensive as it is now. That's how much the one-bedroom units in this building are going for currently, is a little more than twice what I'm paying. So
that's why we need the next step is something called vacancy control, where the rent is tied to the unit. Because we often find in situations where, like, if you have a roommate moves out, you have to sign a new lease, and it's at this new rate. I can't remember the exact percentage that Gene Swanson kind of calculated. It's something like an average of like 213% increase between tenancies. Right. So that you get that, like you said, these old buildings, the rent is the same as brand new rental buildings, and that just seems totally wrong.
Yeah.
Seriously wrong.
Yep.
Shawn, this is going to be confusing. Shawn, podcast co-host, you worked with Cope a few times in the past, but then, recently joined again as a co-chair and are doing this campaign managing thing.
Yeah. So I first joined as a member for a while in 2014 and helped volunteer on the campaign there. And then I left for a while and got involved with the Jean Swanson campaign in 2017. We did an interview with her you can find in the archive in 2017. Anti-poverty activist for 50 plus years in Vancouver, Order of Canada recipient, advocate for ending homelessness, just an awesome person. So she ran it as an independent. And then for 2018, kind of the team Jean made the decision to get back, pull people into Cope. We have this left-wing party with a long history of distinctions in Vancouver, and we're like, we need to unite the left into this, fight for good, strong, legitimately left-wing policies and not like do the kind of half-baked, kind of generic, quote-unquote progressive stuff that you see from other parties. And recently got invited to consider stepping up to be co-chairs with Tanya Webking. She ran in 22 with Cope. And one of the things that we did over the last 6 to 8 months is we said, well, this Vote Socialist campaign is really cool. Shawn was a good candidate. There's good people there. We have a lot of policies in common. Like, can we bring the left together and like start to have a united left front in Vancouver to push against our incumbent mayor, Ken Sim, who's both right-wing and incompetent and embarrassing. So like there's multiple layers to why people don't like him.
Yeah, it's like an honor to even be asked by Cope. Jean Swanson was definitely one of the reasons that I thought it was possible to get into politics, like seeing somebody that's so true to who they are and their activism. And, it's like, wow, this is possible. Tanya also, like, meeting her on the campaign, and instantly, like, there was no animosity that we were a different party. It was like instantly, let's join forces. We're not running against each other. We're running with each other. And it was great energy, and we would see each other at all these events. And so that was another reason why it was a huge honor to be asked.
So Shawn mentioned our horrible mayor, Ken Sim. And, we're all hoping to get him out of office as quickly as possible, even a lot of people on the right. And we can talk more about why that is soon. But the next general municipal Vancouver election where we can actually elect a new mayor isn't until 2026. This current election is a by-election. For city council, we currently have 2 vacant seats on the city council. So this by-election is to fill those 2 seats. And could you talk a little bit about the by-election, why it's happening, and kind of the general field of Vancouver politics right now?
A by-election is happening because a previous councillor named Christine Boyle ran for the BC NDP and won. So she vacated her seat. And then also at the same time, a Green councillor named Adrienne Carr is retiring. Part of the reason why she decided wanting to retire was because of what you said in terms of Ken Sim being both incompetent and just like a mean guy, like a big bully in terms of like stuff that was said to her in back rooms, and just kind of feeling like her position in council was ineffective, couldn't really get anything done. So there's 2 seats open. Cope is running 1 candidate. One City is running 1 candidate. Green's running 1 candidate. Team's running 2, and ABC are running 2, a cop and a tech guy.
Yeah, and so for people who don't know Vancouver politics, Cope, Greens, One City kind of worked together in the past at different times. There are some meaningful differences there. Cope is the left party, One City's the urbanist party, and the Greens are like the Green party that kind of are neither left nor right, but we often find things to work together on. Team is a restart of an old party that's kind of like, they identify as centrist, but they have some really right-wing strains within them. And then ABC is the incumbent mayor, right-wing.
It's a bit of a crowded field. There's some independents kind of sprinkled in there, Roller Girl as well. But yes, the left isn't as split anyways as it was in 2022, with a big kind of clog in the middle with these kind of lefty centrist kind of liberal parties like Forward Together, Kennedy Stewart's party running like 7 people and their dog and his babysitter. Yeah. He ran his wife and his campaign manager. It was just kind of silly.
Part of the reason that Ken Sim came to power was there was a super crowded field of like the non-right. And in 2022, you had these 3 centrist parties, Progress, Vision, and Forward, that all split the centrist vote away from progressive parties. Kennedy Stewart, the independent mayor, created his own party, had like 7 people running. Vision, like voters have been rejecting Vision for like 10 years now, but they still existed and were still running. They used to like have a mayor back in the day. They actually split from Cope because they wanted to do more casinos. And Cope was like, no casino money, no developer money. And they were like, yeah, we'll take that kind of money.
Yeah, so last election, there was a really crowded field, and we ended up with a city council dominated by Ken Sim's party. ABC has a majority of seats currently, and both of the seats that were recently vacated were from the center-left parties. So, yeah, this by-election is fighting to keep the ratio down and hopefully get an actual left-wing candidate on the council.
Yeah, keep in mind also the NPA was a right-wing party and they kind of imploded in on themselves. So that made kind of ABC the only ones really on the right. Where I was kind of instrumental a little bit in bringing that down. Somebody had sent me a screenshot of their financial agent saying we should go out and harass poor people. We should go out and harass these lowlifes. I was like, oh boy. And I published it on my column, Tea and Two Slices, and it was picked up by the Tyee and Press Progress. And it kind of led to a bit of like their imploding. But yeah, getting back to this election, why is it important to have those 2 progressive seats is because there's rifts happening in the ruling coalition. ABC and Ken Sim has kind of proven that he can't really work with anyone. He dissolved the park board and a bunch of his previous commissioners left the party. He had a school commissioner leave as well. And then he kicked out Rebecca Bly, who spoke out against his plan to pause supportive housing.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot about that they recently kicked out one of their own council members for opposing their own plan to get rid of supportive housing. So yeah, Ken Sim and his party, they're running the city incompetently. Their own party is falling apart. Like a bunch of stooges tripping over each other. And if the left can get an actual foothold on the council now, then in 2026, I think there's a lot of opportunity for some big changes there. The following is a parody political advertisement. It has not been paid for by any organization. It's not sponsored by anyone. It's just a comedy sketch on a comedy show done by 2 guys doing some comedy as a joke. It's not a political advertisement.
This episode of Seriously Wrong is proudly brought to you by a political party called ABC Vancouver and our wonderful mayor, Ken Sim. We're so excited to be running in this low turnout by-election where it's going to be mostly landowners voting. We want to make Vancouver a place that's hostile to the poor and inflate police budgets beyond what is reasonable. Almost $100 million a year since we came on. We've been increasing those police budgets and nothing's getting better. In fact, homelessness is getting significantly worse.
Are you saying you support homelessness getting worse? Is that what you're hoping for, or?
We like to think of the homeless as a kind of election sign for repressive right-wing politics that make people angry and they say, we need to punish them somehow.
So actually fixing the problem would be bad for you. It would be like taking down your election signs.
We're the only ones who can fix it because the other parties are crazy Marxist-Leninists.
Really? Oh, all the other parties are Marxist-Leninists? But you're going to fix it. How are you going to do that?
Before I get to that, let me tell you about our wonderful candidates. One of the candidates is from the Vancouver Police Union, who made history when they endorsed us in 2022 after historically saying nonpartisan because they are people with guns and there's a conflict of interest that relates to police budgets. But at ABC, we like to break new ground. We think that getting help in an election through a media scare and then rewarding those people with an almost $100 million increase to police budgets is really good. And one of our candidates, Ralph Kaisers, he's from that same police union. He was part of this process of getting this endorsement, and he's one of the beneficiaries of this increase to the budget. And he's running for us in the by-election, and we're so proud of him because he doesn't have any political experience. He's not really good on the mic. He's actually currently under investigation because it is alleged that he told police officers to not take notes regarding an incident where a civilian having a mental health crisis was killed by police. So make sure to hit the checkbox on the line next to Ralph Kaisers in the April 5th by-election. Don't worry about that investigation. It will be going away soon.
Well, so, I'm just a normal Vancouverite. What are you going to do for me? Help my rent go down? Provide more services?
We're not going to help your rent go down, and we're actually cutting services, even though we've increased property taxes faster than any other mayor and party in history.
So what are we getting for those property taxes? Are we going to get like more parks, more basketball courts for kids, or?
We're going to get hundreds and hundreds of new police officers, and they're going to double parking spaces for small cars.
Okay.
And we're going to give them shotguns and AK-47s for when they walk down the street at street festivals, so everyone feels extra safe.
I noticed that in the park near my house, there's people out there sleeping rough almost every night. I was wondering, did your mayor have anything to do with that, or was that from the last guys, or?
Everything bad in the universe comes from the last mayor, but I'm going to bring you in on a little secret. A lot of the people who are sleeping in tents in parks across Vancouver right now used to sleep in parks in tent cities downtown, far, far away from where children play. But we spent $500,000 to clear out those tent cities, take people's tents and belongings, including some of their personal artifacts like pictures of their family and their only ID, and then we scattered them across the city to advertise our re-election campaign. We're also stopping new supportive housing and shutting down old modular housing sites where people were kept out of homelessness. So that means by the end of our term, homelessness is guaranteed to be at a record high. We're going for the high score, and we're going to get it.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like we have some pretty different values, but, sometimes I'm willing to compromise on values if it means electing someone who's really good at their job, the competent leader, brings people together, runs a well-managed city and mayor's office. Is that you guys? Is that Ken Sim and ABC?
Not at all. It's all Tweedledees in the ABC staff these days. Ken Sim rarely shows up to vote because he's jet-setting around the world to Bitcoin conferences. Members of City Council are receiving things like motorcycle helmets as gifts from rich developers and expensing trips to Toronto for the Junos, not on civic business. And people are excited for us. We just had our big campaign launch party, and we had 34 people there, 3 of which were undercover with Cope. It's been alleged in the media, although denied by the mayor's office, that shortly after the election, Ken Sim was caught drinking and driving by the police, and he was let off with a warning. His former chief of staff, Kareem Alem, has said in the media that he said this is a very big deal, and if it's true, Ken Sim will have to resign. He was fired the next day. Of course, when you're falsely accused of something in the media and your chief of staff says, if that is true, it is a big deal, the best thing to do is fire them, because you can't have someone spreading those awful, awful untrue rumors saying, if that is true, it is bad, because that's not true. And it doesn't matter if they're good at their job or anything else, you just fire them for that. That's the kind of city we want. ABC Vancouver, for a better city.
Yeah, so that was not a real campaign ad from ABC Vancouver. That wasn't endorsed by them. It's literally just us, 2 guys. We recorded it, microphones, we bought ourselves, and I'm going to edit it. That's about it. Just a couple of guys joking around, not an ad. But yeah, the supportive housing thing is just wild. Like, I'm sure most of our listeners are aware, Vancouver has a massive issue with homelessness. And Ken Sim City Council recently voted to pause all supportive housing, in my opinion, because they hate poor people. Although their stated reason is to pressure the other municipalities in the Metro Vancouver area to build more supportive housing. We really care about supportive housing, but we're not going to build any until they build some first, because they're not doing enough. So in order to make the problem better, we're going to do less. Is their weird, convoluted, stated reasoning.
It's essentially a weird kind of way to blackmail or extort the province and other communities to also build social housing. They often tout the numbers that Vancouver has 25% of the population, but 77% of the social housing. And while it is true that other communities need to build supportive housing, we've also been trying for the last 40 years, and people routinely are up in arms against kind of supportive housing. We saw it in Maple Ridge. We saw it in Richmond. We've seen it in Burnaby in the past. Surrey has a little bit. But, to say that like we have to do this, we have to build this housing elsewhere. It's like, bro, we've been trying, and the suburbs, they also hate more people and they don't want it. Also, they don't like that it's concentrated all on the downtown east side and they want to spread it out. And the reason it's concentrated there is because of gentrification elsewhere, pushing people from the West End into the downtown east side. Fairview Slopes, Yaletown was a big one, the mass clearance of people there. And it was policy. It was like police policy to kind of contain the downtown east side. And then when services and all those ad hoc groups that popped up, like Portland Hotel Society, to kind of stop the bleeding and be a bandage, then activists started fighting back for their services to keep the services there. So it's kind of twofold. I mentioned Portland Hotel Society, but there's tons. There's Lookout Society, Rain City, Atira, First United Church. They're often called like the poverty industrial complex or the poverty pimps, as Ralph Kaiser's, the ABC candidate, has called them in the past. And this is kind of seen as a way to punish those people in a weird way and to almost blame the people that stepped up as the cause, when the cause is really just rampant inequality. I know Sean's probably going to get mad at me. Neoliberal austerity, just not funding things properly for so long that they fall into disrepair, creating the conditions of decline, and then running in and saying, we're the only ones that can fix it. Developers are the only ones that can fix it. So that's really what it's about. It's about opening up the downtown east side to their developer friends and their funders like Chip Wilson, who owns a ton of land there.
I'm totally cool with you saying neoliberal austerity. What was the thing? What was the actual word that I asked you to
Zenith.
not?
You didn't.
I said please don't use Zenith on the campaign trail. Yeah, and supportive housing. I think it's like a campaign thing to them, right? Is that they want to like demonize and attack people who are low income, who are drug users and stuff, and then have their big platform promise if we're going to stop building housing for those people. But supportive housing includes seniors housing, housing for people with disabilities. There's a variety of people who need supportive housing. But the really twisted thing about this, and this actually pisses me off, and I would rarely say this in politics, but what they're doing is evil, because what they're saying is you have to elect us to clean up this mess, this horrible thing of all these poor people. And then they're pouring gasoline on the fire. I'm quoting Shawn here, saying they're pouring gasoline on the fire and saying only I can put it out. So like they want to run on poor bashing. Oh, there's so much homelessness. There's so much tent cities. And then they're pursuing policies that are going to actively increase homelessness. They see people who are homeless, who are drug users and poor people, not as part of a social crisis that needs to actually be addressed, but instead they're seeing them as like election signs for their tough law and order bullshit. And then they're pursuing policies that are like, yeah, we're going to punish them by not building houses for them to try to like tingle that like vengeful part of the electorate. And so we're going to make the problem worse to try to get them to vote for us again. And that to me, like that's beyond the pale of like decency.
And then the third prong of that is to also then, when you do create more homelessness and more street disorder, is that you say, oh, we need more police. So it's part election campaign, it's part land grab, and it's part padding police budgets.
Yeah, didn't Ken Sim hire a bunch of police? I forget this thing, but it was like he campaigned on like nurses and police,
Yeah,
and then only
nurses.
hired police.
100 nurses, 100 police was the big kind of thing. And to do this balance, this continuum of care kind of thing, he hired 200 police officers and 12 nurses.
Yeah, so these mental health nurses are supposed to help people with like psychosis and stuff like that is the idea. But they just still have the cops doing it. And the cops themselves don't want to do it. Like it's not their idea of, like, you don't sign up to be a cop because like your big dream is to be interacting with people having mental health crises all the time.
So we want to take that off their plate.
Yeah, so instead of a 1-to-1 ratio, they did like a 20-to-1-ish ratio.
But it's even the nurses that they did hire, like they're still working in tandem with the police. And there's ways, that still creates trauma. People still don't trust the nurses if they're with the police. So, I think there's room for a completely different type of system. I've heard terms like peer-assisted care teams, people, who have lived experience with mental health problems or drug use that can speak to them on their level rather than it coming from this like authoritarian top down kind of thing. I've heard like indigenous led care teams as well. But yeah, there has to be an alternative. And they package this pause on supportive housing saying the status quo isn't working. To me, that's just absurd because policing, criminalization, prohibition, that is the status quo. You know, we've been talking about the downtown east side this way since the 1950s, since we were building freeways through there, you know, and urban renewal, we got to clean up these slums, and they demolished an entire black neighborhood called Hogan's Alley. You know, you have to kind of take in the historical sort of narrative, the entire arc of how we've dealt with housing in the city, in this province for the last few decades at least. It's part of that same thing. Like the reason there's so many homeless people is because the rents are high. Like it's not because there's some sort of magical thing where I just choose to be homeless or I did heroin once and now I'm on the streets. You know, it's like, no, it's directly related to trauma as a result of precarity and lack of housing options and being underhoused. And like, why isn't that connected for so many people? I don't know.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is the land grab piece. So ABC had the pausing supportive housing motion. They also had the uplifting the downtown east side motion, which gets rid of some of the requirements to put in social housing and developments in this like historically poor neighborhood, the poorest postal code in Canada. And yeah, so how is that, for people who don't understand or have the context, like how is that a land grab and to whose benefit?
Yeah, so there's something called the local area process for the downtown east side, going back to Jean Swanson again and many others. They, at the time, you can ask Jean about this, but she would say they thought they failed. They wanted 100% social housing for any building in this zone. It's called the downtown east side Oppenheimer district. It's a pretty small little area, but it's a significant area. And essentially what it kind of resulted in was a ban on condos. So what you needed was 60% social housing. That's where they thought that they had lost. 60% social housing, and of that, 1/3 had to be shelter rate. And shelter rate refers to what is given to people on welfare.
So yeah, $500 a month.
It was $375 for like 20 years. They've just raised it to a whopping $500. I don't know where you can find an apartment, you know, even an SRO for $500. But so 1/3 of that would be at that rate, at that $500. The result of this was that land prices in this district stayed stable. It's the only place in Vancouver where land prices haven't doubled or tripled. And in my mind, the developers are mad at that. They want in on that because it's the last affordable place. Of course, what this means is we can't build any new social housing if that's gone. So because of the depressed land values, we can build in there. And that, again, that's like where this concentration comes from. Like it's the only place where the land value is low, where we can afford to build social housing. As you know, construction costs are a big part of the housing crisis as well. It costs a lot, and it would cost nonprofits a lot. So this is a place where it's stable. And if you are to say, okay, well, we need social mix, I think is what they call it, which is just another fancy word for gentrification in my mind. So if you build a tower, like, okay, we're gonna allow a few towers here where that rule, that 60% rule, doesn't exist, and we're gonna have all market towers. Of course, what that does is that's gonna put pressure on those SROs that are charging the $500 shelter rate. If their land prices go up, it's gonna put pressure on them to charge more or to sell their buildings completely to new developers as well. So that's what I mean by when I say land grab.
And who benefits? Who's buying up this land?
Yeah, well, we know Chip Wilson, who's a big funder of ABC, and he was also a funder of the aforementioned Vancouver is Dying. So you've got this propaganda film saying downtown east side is a war zone. You've got the media in lockstep, kind of convincing everyone that it's just a crime spree. You know, it's totally unsafe. We have to get in there and change things. And at the same time, while this is happening, Chip Wilson's buying up all this land. I'm not sure the exact figure, but, you know, like Red Gate used to be at 800 East Hastings. That's a popular music venue. And artist studios, they got evicted. Charities got evicted from that area. And there's a quote because the charity was saying, well, you're evicting us, like that's terrible. And the guy from Low Tide, which is Chip Wilson's property company, said, well, I don't go into Starbucks and ask for a discount on my latte. So why should I give you a discount just because you're a charity? He said that. Like, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're up against here.
Just quickly for our audience, if anyone doesn't know who Chip Wilson is, he's like Vancouver's local billionaire. He founded Lululemon. He's the reason why Lululemon bags sometimes have Ayn Rand quotes on them. He's a big fan of Ayn Rand. Like, he put up a sign recently in front of his obscenely expensive mansion saying that the NDP, our provincial Social Democrat Party, is communist. So yeah, that's just, I know we have listeners all around the world. In Vancouver, you can kind of say Chip Wilson like Elon Musk and everybody knows who he is, but that's who Chip Wilson is.
One of the things I was really surprised to find out too, like on top of, there's all these super rich people funding ABC and stuff, and you can publicly look on the disclosure, Chip Wilson's entire family, his 20-year-old son gives the maximum every year, and you add it all together. It's like a way to get around, it seems to be a way to get around the campaign expense limits. But then one of the things too was like that you mentioned the unprecedented endorsement of ABC by the Vancouver Police Union. So around the time of the George Floyd protests, there was a little bit of a thing through City Council of, are we going to pause the police budget and stop increasing it? Obviously, decreasing the police budget would be a bridge too far, but maybe we're just going to freeze it, which created this huge resistance, got them involved in politics, had them endorse ABC. There was all this like weird media stuff around that time of like stranger attacks and stuff, like this coordinated way. The Vancouver police chief and union head rejected freedom of information didn't respond to freedom of information requests that related to the election.
Yeah, but and the stranger attacks in particular, they just stopped responding to media.
So that's like genuinely breaking freedom of information law as a public facing institution. And the police budget's been increased by almost $100 million per year since ABC was elected. They've done a record amount of property tax increases in Vancouver as compared to anyone to like fund more cops.
And they're cutting services. There's lineups at the pools. They're closing pools. They're cutting green bin services, even like basic road work. And they campaigned on like core services, and then they turn around, raise your property taxes by, what is it, 23.68? Is that what we calculated?
Something like that,
24%. In 3 years, the fastest of any mayor ever, and decrease services. So it's like he's, in a way, he's kind of accomplished something no mayor ever has, is raising property taxes and decreasing services at the same time. You got to give him kudos there, but...
non-Euclidean politics.
But the freedom of information around stranger attacks, the reason why this is important is because they knew at the time stranger attacks were decreasing. And they kept the billboards up. They had these big yellow billboards, like basically don't talk to strangers, like just scaring people, creating this atmosphere of fear. And it was also kind of like oddly tied into the Stop Asian Hate as well, because there was a huge increase in Asian hate, but they kind of tied that in. We're the only ones that can stop that. And then it's like, your budget is already the highest in Canada. Why aren't you just doing that anyways? And similarly, they just announced a new thing where it's called Project Barrage, where they're going to actually go after drug dealers. It's like, why weren't you doing that before? What do you guys do? How much more money do you need?
Our new unfunded election promise is we're going to spend $5 million to criminalize drug dealers 3 years into our mandate.
Yeah. It's really strange. But also, like, Guy Felicella talked about this. It's like there is no shortage of people who want to be like low-level, street-level drug dealers. So like you just take a few out, there's always going to be people that pop up. It just does nothing to actually tackle where the problem lies. If there is a criminalized supply, then there's going to be criminal elements. So why not remove that criminal element altogether and have a regulated, safe supply of drugs for people? Of course, that's a bridge too far. They don't want to touch that, of course, because I don't know why. But maybe we could then be like, okay, we don't need to fund your budgets anymore. So it's a part of that whole thing, just this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, what's that video game from the Katamari?
Katamari Damacy?
Yeah, where you just kind of keep things just keep attaching to you, and you just have to
You
keep
push
that
the big ball and everything sticks to it and you get a bigger,
Yeah.
bigger ball.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, where like we can't even like take a few things off.
Yeah, the Katamari police budget that just grows year after year, encompassing everything.
Yeah, they keep putting all these policies in that make all these social issues worse, and then try and throw more police at it to
Like
harass people and put them in jail.
Our plan to fix the lineups at the pools is we're going to get cops for lifeguards, and we're going to like the teacher shortage at schools, cops in the classrooms.
Yeah, that's not far off. I mean, they did put cops back in schools, so.
You mentioned too where he was trying to take out the parks board. I think part of that too is like wanting to, like you're saying, make it easier to cut services. If there's no parks board, then the city council can easily do that kind of stuff without an intermediary. They can sell off park land to developers to, get rid of the beautiful green spaces that still exist in parts of Vancouver neighborhoods and turn them into more buildings. Empty buildings, preferably. Extremely posh, expensive empty buildings is what we need more of. Yeah, that Parks Board thing really annoyed me too, because one of the few things that I like about living in Vancouver, earning less than $37,000 net income after taxes, is you get a free pass to all the pools and the fitness centers and the community centers. Like the Park Board has a access program for lower income people. So I really like that. I don't want that to go away. I just assumed that it would.
I actually didn't even know that, so I would definitely qualify for that.
Yeah. All you got to do is
but not
send them a
after
letter.
April 5th. I'll be disqualified. So
Yeah, but you can use Ken Sims' gym.
yeah, there we go.
You can still get 1 year because the 2024 taxes you can send in for
That's a
next
good loophole tip for a new city councilor.
Yeah. Loopholes.
Yeah.
Let's close loopholes. How about that?
Yeah, the vacancy control thing of like, one of the things that we found talking about it is like tying the rent to the unit instead of the tenant, is if you say vacancy control, people are like, I don't know what that is, because you're unfamiliar with these words. It makes sense. But if you're like, well, we want to close the loopholes that landlords use to jack up rents, then people like take the clipboard from your hand, sign the petition, like, and they're like, well, they used this loophole on me. It was total bullshit. Yeah, a lot of people have that experience of like, well, I recently moved out of an apartment and they raised the rent by like $1,400 a month after I left. They left it empty for at least 4 months, and I know because I got a package delivered there accidentally and went back to it, and they actually like left the door unlocked, and I knocked on the door to see if someone was there, and there was no answer. And I just like peeked in the door to see if it was empty, and it was. And then I just like walked around in my old apartment and like hung out there for a minute. And and then they were trying to get people to pay these high extra rents by being like, we'll give you a $500 Visa gift card if you sign up at these extremely high rents.
There's a place downtown that's like giving people like a car.
Really?
Yeah, it's like Curve, that building. It's called Curve. They're having trouble like doing pre-sale. So if you sign up to do a pre-sale, and it's like a luxury car too.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need more cars on the streets.
Well, I mean, that's part of the market housing shit. So in theory, when you have too much supply at a rate that people can't afford, then rents are supposed to go down to meet like what people are willing to pay. But instead what they do is they'll calculate how many months you can keep it open where you're going to get a better return on investment or whatever over the long term. Because if you sign someone up at $3,000, they pay $3,000 forever. But if you sign someone up at $2,000, it's going to take 10 years to get up to $3,000. So if you wait it out and you offer like perks like a free month's rent or a gift card and things like that, it's a way that like the landlord industry can hold off on filling units by refusing to make any real substantial price breaks, but then to give like these perks, even when vacancy rate is increasing. It's an issue with the limited supply and demand kind of view of housing.
And you said landlord industry, so it's like we're not talking like mom and pops here. Like we're talking about like kind of like financialized, like instruments like, pension funds and REITs and stuff like investing in housing. We're not like talking about living in the basement of like a single family dwelling or whatever, right?
Yeah, I
so
mean,
like that's
unless they're reading
not
like
all
some,
landlords.
if they're reading like blogs, like landlord blogs or whatever, and there's like, here's 10 ways to fuck with your stupid tenants, then maybe they will. But
one of those loopholes that you're talking about was done to residents of the Berkeley Tower in the West End, which is now like has this beautiful like Douglas Copeland like mural on the whole thing. Like you can see it from English Bay. It's like actually like pretty beautiful. But it's this building where they rent-evicted everyone, and they renovated it, cleaned it up. And then part of the sort of rule is that you're supposed to find similar rented housing for these people, tenant relocation kind of policies. And what this guy did, John Stovall, and this is what I've heard. I don't want to get sued by John Stovall, but it's similar to what you're talking about, like in terms of like we'll give you a voucher. So he set the rent at what the market would bear, like so $2,500, and their rent would have been like around $1,000 at Berkeley. So he gave them a rebate. So it's like, okay, your rent's actually $2,500, but we'll make up the difference, right? So then when they did leave, then that rent is set at $2,500, not the previous $1,000. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So it's like, you're setting the floor at this $2,500, but like, oh yeah, here you go, here's the difference. And that's worth it to them because it's that long game that you're kind of talking about, right? It's that long game where now it's set at $2,500 and then it goes up from there 3% every year. Because we do have rent control like we were talking about earlier, we do have rent control in BC. It's, I think, tied to inflation, sort of goes up 3% or something. So it'd be $2,500, so it'd be 3% every year on top of the $2,500, not the $1,000, which is a huge amount of money.
Maybe as a broad question, but Vancouver have got a notoriously rough housing rental market and so on. It's one of the big things that we talk about when we're talking to people in the street indoors and stuff. It's like, how do we get out of this mess? As a city councilor, like, what are your priorities on housing? Or maybe we could talk the big picture vision of in the scenario where you're mayor with a entirely left-wing council. You can do whatever you want, but then also maybe specifically in opposition. Stop
giving away city land. I was at an event the other day where we gave away a kid's basketball court to build like condos.
When you say we,
yeah, not me. The city. Yeah, they're building on this child's basketball court outside of a school called Fleming Elementary, and they gave a 99-year lease to this development for $8 million. I'm not super great at math, but that's like...
It's like $7,000 a month or something.
$7,000 a month, which, not a lot. So why are we doing that? And that could be permanently affordable social housing, things like co-ops, things like community land trusts, where the valuation of that land just goes back into a trust and everyone benefits from that. The whole community benefits from that.
We need basketball courts for kids too.
We need more. We need like more. We need outdoor pools. We need skate parks. We need to build covered areas for seniors to do Tai Chi in parks. Like we need all that infrastructure, not less. We're not giving it away. And part of that is what you said with the park board too, and giving away our green spaces, And this also would go away ways to like reduce crime. If you've got kids playing basketball, and this might be like kind of buying into some sort of like kids who are just playing basketball, they're not going to commit crimes, kind of like very like kind of like 80s like era like. But you know what I mean? If kids are healthy and happy and they have their needs met, if everyone has their needs met in the city, then they're not going to do that. And Ken Simmons, he wants to get in on this market rental game. So he's like using city land to get in. He calls it missing middle, but it's like a way to like increase revenue to the city. So it was like, what it would be the incentive to keep rents stable there if it's like funding city pockets, right?
Yeah.
That's so weird.
So they're using city land to make market rent apartments that are owned by the city to generate revenue to fund VPD increases.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, they want to turn the city into a landlord charging the same prices as all the other expensive landlords.
Right, and city land is at a premium. Why are we giving it away just to get into that game? We should be doing that to create permanently affordable co-op housing or community land trust, like I said. Just build housing or build more of it. And another thing that I like, and Montreal does this, it's called the right of first refusal. And there's a bit of kind of nomenclature confusion because some people think of the previously mentioned tenant relocation as the right for the tenants to first refuse an apartment. But in Montreal, it's called right of first refusal. So it would be right of the city to be the first one to refuse purchasing it. And then we can expand that to, it would be after that, okay, the city doesn't want it. It's not in our budget or it's not in the right area. Would the tenants like to buy it? And then you could have the tenants own their own building. And that goes into other tenant protections like legalizing tenant unions, having tenants be able to organize as an entire building rather than just like each person having to deal with the residential tenancy board, like having a representative do it for you and negotiate like things like rent evictions and things like that.
Yeah, so on that front, like I've read legalized tenant unions in your 22 platform and didn't fully understand what it meant. And like a conversation we had really made it click. When there's a dem eviction, which happens in Vancouver all the time, you have
There's
the old
like one just around the corner that's happening.
Yeah, so you have like an old
10th.
apartment building where a decent amount of tenants are paying $1,200 a month. If it was on the market now, it'd be $3,000 a month or whatever. And they slate that building for demolition, and they're going to replace it with like a new market tower that they can make a lot more money on. And currently, each of those individual tenants has this relationship with the landlord and the tenant relocation stuff. A lot of what they do is they offer buyouts, like cash for keys, they call it, where it's like, okay, well, we'll give you $10,000 to just fuck off and figure out somewhere else to live. But like legalizing tenants unions, creating like a legal framework for all those tenants who are facing that pressure from the landlord at once to like pick a representative amongst them to negotiate as a group, prevent these lowball buyouts, be able to like genuinely negotiate to either get a better deal or ideally like block the redevelopment and find some way to like ideally be able to take over the building. Yeah, I think that's like a really cool idea. Like we have a tenants union in Vancouver, the Vancouver Tenants Union, and they do good work. They're fundamentally like an activist organization, but they don't have legal protections for like tenants just genuinely aren't allowed to stand together and create collective demand. So they all have an individual relationship with the landlord.
Yeah. To me, it seems like a beautiful thing. I think San Fran legalized that recently. New York's done a similar things where tenants have bought their whole buildings. Just seems like a win-win for everyone. And then the other thing, so if a city did buy the building in Montreal's, they don't use it. It's not like they're using it on every time a building comes up for sale. I think they've used it like 6 times. But it's a way to preserve this existing housing stock without having to like build brand new social housing buildings, because as we talked about before, the cost of that is often prohibitive. So you're just preserving like these like 4-story walk-ups that are threatened in the Broadway plan. You're just kind of preserving these buildings. And yes, there might be some maintenance required, but that could be fully funded with a mansion tax or a fully funded like Vancouver Housing Authority or whatever you want to call it, maybe a housing corporation. I know there's different terms thrown around, but it can be done, and it just takes political will. As a one person on council, or maybe, if we get, somebody with similar sort of beliefs, would we be able to do this kind of grand plan right now? I'm not sure. But could we convince some of the kind of other councillors that are like interested also in like not having more homeless people or not displacing people? I think it could be a good sell.
Yeah, you mentioned a mansion tax, the mansion tax to end homelessness, flagship COPE promise. How does that work?
That would be a 1% additional tax on any home that is valued over $5 million. And that revenue would, I haven't crunched the numbers. It's not my job to crunch the numbers, as Ken Sim famously said.
Yeah, he said that about FIFA a year and a half ago.
But no, it would be a significant addition to the city budget and be able to purchase some of these buildings and house people. And then I think it would be even like a 2% tax on anything over 10 million. There isn't a lot of those, but we know Chip Wilson is one of them.
Yeah.
Was it 17 million? Is that what it's worth? Or
something like that. It goes up every time you look at it.
It just went up as we started this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are progressive taxes on like the value past 5 million, the value past 10 million, and so on. And the stats, when we ran the numbers a couple years back, it's very much the same situation today, but this would generate enough revenue to build enough housing to house every homeless person in Vancouver within 2 years. And after that, it would continue to generate revenue that could be used building housing for everyone, permanently affordable public housing in every neighborhood on public land with a public developer.
At every income level.
That's
fair.
yeah, that was an applause line at your speech.
Yeah, it was. Well, one thing I like when we talk about this is, yes, we'd have to ask the province to change the charter. But people, oh, you can't do that. It's like, yeah, we can. We did that with the vacancy tax, which was a COPE thing, or?
Yeah. So the idea of taxing vacant units was a flagship COPE campaign promise in 2014. And then COPE didn't actually win any seats that election. But then the Vision Vancouver party, which is the center-left party, took that up because it was so popular. They saw they were losing ground to it. They implemented it at the city level. And then the province, a couple years later, implemented it at the provincial level. And then even more recently, the feds are doing it at the federal level too, right?
Yeah. So that's something you can do even if you don't win,
Yeah.
But one thing that's always struck me as well is that we could have done this, and I love doing history, so maybe stop me if this is boring. But in 1993, we could have had progressive property taxes, maybe 92 even, but it was the Harcourt government, and there was substantial outcry from West Side homeowners and other sort of wealthy homeowners saying, no, absolutely not, we can't do this. And so think 1992, if we had a progressive property tax, we're capturing that value that in some people call it unearned value, like a windfall lottery that a lot of these people have received with tripling their property values. We could have captured some of that and funded our public institutions for the last 30 years, and to me, we're always just chasing these kind of ghosts of failed policy from decades ago, right? We're just always just on our back foot, catching up and reacting, right? 93 is a fascinating year in general. That's the year that the Paul Martin budget, the famous Paul Martin budget when Chrétien was prime minister, got the federal government out of housing altogether. That's been offloaded onto provinces and subsequently offloaded onto municipalities. Again, we're just on our back feet, kind of always grappling with that. If we had been in housing this whole time, we would have brand new co-ops everywhere, and we just don't.
It's really wild history. You can look at the, you're not supposed to use graphs too much in election campaigns, but the graphs, they really fucking blow my mind. It's the province and the feds, they used to invest in affordable public housing for decades. And during that time, rents were affordable. There was no homelessness crisis. Homelessness existed on an individual basis, but there was more shelter beds than there were homeless people. So homeless people would go to the shelter and there'd be extra beds. And now it's the case that we have 700 shelter beds in Vancouver and 4,000 homeless people. Rents are skyrocketing year after year and have been for 30 years. And it's all connected to this time where you have this harsh austerity imposed from the federal government. And then it's also, you start seeing the province actually selling off existing public housing, turn it into private market housing, jacking up the rents. And so it's the same system that jacks up our rents in Vancouver creates this homelessness crisis. And it all relates to the government withdrawing from their role in public housing, which is also really weird because in Canada, one of the things we're proud of in politics, when we look to our neighbors in the South, is that we have this public healthcare system. And we know that it keeps things affordable. It doesn't cost $500,000 to have a baby, all this crazy stuff you hear happening from the US. And the public, we've done basically the US model of healthcare on our housing system. And then the result is record skyrocketing homelessness, some of the highest rents in the Western world, people being displaced from their homes.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, you can have it.
the US healthcare model of public housing in Canada.
You guys mentioned too the vacancy tax, and I think the current city council, Ken Sims City Council, also passed a thing that excluded new builds from the vacancy tax. So, one of the reasons to have a vacancy tax is so that units aren't sitting empty. If you can't get what you're hoping for when you're trying to sell it, you will sell it for less. It keeps them on the market. It pushes prices down. But yeah, if you make an exclusion for new builds, that's partially why we have all these brand new, beautiful, completely empty condo units in the city. I think there's a graph I saw. It was 12,000 empty condos currently because they're just holding on to them and they don't get charge the vacancy tax because they're brand new.
Not only did we do that, we also retroactively refunded
Right.
taxes previously collected in the tune of $3.8 million to developers.
Oh, good. The developers really.
Well, not
really
only are we
needed that.
not collecting those taxes, we're like giving it back.
Yeah.
And there's talk also. We just demolished a Holborn-owned building called Dunsmuir Hotel, and we just demolished that. And there's a rule when you demolish. It was previously an SRO, and there's a rule when you demolish an SRO, you have to pay a fee for each unit. And if we do that, that would be $50 million, I think, that we would get. And this council is considering waiving that. Because why would we want $50 million for the city budget?
Yeah, to invest in housing that people need that's affordable.
Yes.
And the $3.8 million thing, it's like, not only does that incentivize these backdoor things we're talking about of like holding these units empty for a long time for the long-term financial prospects, like my former landlord, which, by the way, is the same property management company the city is using on their public developments.
Interesting.
My landlord who jacked up my old rent, same company, Devon Properties. So they're making it easier for them to hold rents high instead of actually having to like use the quote unquote market dynamic of meeting people where they're at. And then that $3.8 million is earmarked as empty homes tax revenue to be spent on affordable housing in the city. So they took almost $4 million of revenue that could be used to like build affordable units, to procure more land for that, to set up modular housing sites for people who are homeless, which we're about to lose 700 of, by the way. So we have 4,000 homeless people, and there's 700 units where people who are at the edge of homelessness are about to be kicked out on the streets under Ken Sim.
But then he says, oh, it's because we want better, like, permanent housing for them, not these temporary things. It's like,
We want that, but we're not going to.
We're not gonna do it,
We're going to do everything we can to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, so that's $4 million for housing that we need that can help relieve homelessness, that was given back to people who are already rich because they were pouting like, oh, this has cost so much money. Like, we're going to go on capital strike and not build anything, which is another argument for the public developer thing is like, if the housing market is such that when rents are going down, there's not an incentive to build anymore, then the premise of entirely market-based solutions to the housing crisis falls apart because there's this paradox in it. But if you have a public developer, it doesn't matter the housing conditions, it doesn't matter how profitable it's going to be because it's a public service. It's a public service like healthcare.
they absorb that kind of shock from when the market refuses to build kind of thing, creating this buffer at the bottom. There's a kind of weird thing where like you do that and housing trickles up in a weird sense because there's this idea that if you build all these apartments everywhere, market rate apartments, that people are going to choose to kind of pay more. You know, like even though it's housing in Vancouver is already super expensive, and it does happen. You know, you get a promotion at work, or you have a new family, and it does happen in these small cases where people do choose to pay more and live in a bigger space. But the vast majority of people go downwards; they want to be at the bottom level, and this creates homelessness because you've got people living in what should be these kind of cheap apartments, pushing those other people out. But if you have that kind of buffer at the bottom, you absorb that, and then you do actually make it possible for people to move up.
Yeah, no, and the studies that are cited for like market housing advocates cite these studies that show that when you build new market housing, the amount that rents increases less than it would have otherwise. So it still continually increases, but it increases less than a similar place where they don't build new housing. So that's like the argument for market housing contributing to affordability, which I think is true in a very limited sense. Like, it's not like if you're going to redevelop a parking lot to be market rate rentals, then and like people want to live there, you're not going to keep it empty forever to keep rents high, then great. But those same studies, and I've actually read these studies, show that public housing, affordable housing, things in that area have an even greater effect in terms of affecting the overall rent market. Like for every market unit you create, you know, it's a 3% impact or 2% impact or whatever. And then for every below market one you create, it's like 6, 7, 8% impact or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no economist or anything, but it makes sense to me in terms of competition, supply and demand, that the more supply you create at the very bottom level of cost per unit or whatever, the more you're providing competition for the landlords, that they are like, oh, well, if there's all these units available for less, then if we want to attract people to our market rate units, then the market rate has to go down. Like we're competing with an alternate service that is providing people with what they need for less. So if we want them to move into our places, we have to lower our prices. Now it's time for Fun Facts.
Hey everybody, Shawn here. I got Aaron across from me. I've been working on this Cope project on a volunteer basis for like a while now. I got all these fun facts in my head that Aaron doesn't already know, and I was like, maybe I'll tell him these fun facts and then he can react and give that man on the street kind of like organic, legit, 100%. I haven't told him any of this yet. He can kind of weigh in on what maybe the implications are.
Yes, I'll try to react audibly and not just with facial expressions for the listeners at home.
Thank you. Yeah, and for my benefit, the facial expressions are always appreciated.
Right.
But for the listeners at home, that does help. Okay, so the first fun fact is, in Vancouver, non-resident property owners are allowed to vote in civic elections. So if you own a property in Vancouver, but you don't live here, say you live in Salmon Arm or Nanaimo, and you're a landlord who owns a property in Vancouver, you are entitled to vote for mayor and council.
So it's not even like, oh, I have like a second property in Vancouver that I sometimes live at. It's like, even if like you don't live there at all because other people live there because you're a landlord.
So yeah, when you're doing your nomination paperwork, you need to get like 25 nominators for any candidate. There's a separate line, sign this one if you're a non-resident property owner. Sign this one if you are a resident elector. So theoretically speaking, everyone who nominated a candidate could be people who don't live in the city, and they're all entitled to go vote.
Imagine if that was the rule everywhere. Like you could just vote in every mayoral election in the country if you just buy a property in every city. That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, and then there's also people who live here who are permanent residents. They have lived here for years. They're going to continue living for years. Like this is their city, their home. They're not allowed to vote.
Right, because you have to be a Canadian citizen.
Yeah, not just a permanent resident. Other cities, actually, permanent residents are allowed to vote in civic elections. Like, not all of them, but some.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, if you live in a city, you should probably be able to vote in the elections.
Yeah. Okay, fun fact number 2.
The first one wasn't that fun, but yeah.
There are limits on how much you can spend on elections. There's also limits on how much you can spend as a third-party advertiser on elections. Say we register Seriously Wrong as a third-party advertiser. We want to buy some billboards that say, vote for this guy, don't vote for this guy. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to collect donations, and there's a certain amount of money you can spend in a given election cycle. You also have to put what's called an authorization line, which indicates where the funding came from. This is authorized by Citizens for a Free Vancouver, blah, blah, blah. Here's our phone number to connect our financial authority within our organization. And the same is true for election periods or campaign periods, like the last 4 weeks, and then also the pre-election period in a typical election. But in by-elections in particular, there's a loophole, which is that there is no pre-election period in a by-election. So right now, as we're recording this, it's not yet 4 weeks to Election Day. Third-party advertisers can run political ads right now, spending as much money as they want without indicating where the financing comes from.
Sorry, I was trying to be more audible, like a gasp or something. But yeah, no, I mean, that seems weird. Like, why would there not be a pre-election period? Like, the period before the election period would technically, just going by the meaning of the words, be a pre-election period.
Yeah, there's this gap in the law, and I just found out about this recently because Ken Sims, chief of staff, ran a Twitter ad attacking Shawn, accusing him of wanting to defund the police and saying he was not a serious candidate. And he spent probably at least hundreds, potentially thousands on this ad on Twitter over like a 4-hour period. And it didn't say where the financing came from. Did it come from him? Did it come from the party or whatever? Did it come from a third-party group? No disclosure. We reached out to Elections BC about it, and they're like, that's actually fine because there's no pre-election period in by-elections. So we don't know how much he spent, where it came from, or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that should change.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Here's another fun fact. Third-party advertising spending is regulated in BC, but third-party political organizations that deal with electoral politics more broadly aren't. So what that means is, theoretically, you're a billionaire, you want to give $500 million to a political organization, and that political organization's mandate is to recruit right-wing candidates, to train them and to connect to their donor lists, to make big lists of people who want to donate the maximum. So this year it's roughly $1,400 pegged to inflation. Because you can't give more than $1,400, here's the workaround, is you can donate unlimited money into an organization that does like donation bundling, where you can spend that money to recruit candidates, train them, test political messages, run surveys, run political polling, and so on. So you can have this huge, like extremely well-funded third-party organization doing all these things that directly relate to elections, but because they're not running advertising, it's all allowed. And then secondly, you can make a list of all these rich donors who want to give the maximum, and you can set up a system with them where when election season comes, anywhere in the province or whatever, you can say, okay, these are our candidates in Kelowna, these are our candidates in Vancouver, these are our candidates in Nanaimo. And so all of these rich right-wing guys can give the maximum to every campaign that they're eligible to give the maximum to. And they can also recruit their family to do the same thing. Say like my brother, my sister, my wife, my dad, my mom, my kids. We all give the $1,400 max every year to every election, according to this donation bundling program run by a third-party group that is not a regulated election advertiser. And that is happening now.
Yeah, it seems like a loophole that gives people with money undue power over the political process. That's my reaction to that fact.
That's a good point. Here's another fun fact. Between 2016 and 2021, there were 47,000 rental units in Vancouver that rented for less than $1,000 a month that were lost. So 47,000 is like 20% of the rental units in Vancouver, something like that. Where at 2016, they were at a relatively affordable level. By 2021, they were all turned into more expensive units, mostly through the cycling of tenants and the jackups that Shawn was talking about earlier.
Right.
And there's also a study from the United States that shows that for every $100 rent goes up, homelessness increases by 7%. And during that same period, you have this skyrocketing homelessness crisis where now we're up to over 4,000 people who are homeless in Vancouver and something like 16,000 in BC, which is an amplification that coincides exactly with that loss of affordable units.
Yeah, that is not surprising. The rents going up, homelessness going up, that those things match up. That's like some of the least surprising news possible. Thank you for telling me.
You're welcome. Oh yeah, so the province of BC sets housing targets to how much new units of housing need to be made to match with the growing population and to prevent rents from skyrocketing from a lack of supply. That's the theory behind it. At the provincial level, if you compare the housing targets that are being put on cities at what income levels they're being built for to the census data on what people's incomes are in Vancouver, 2/3 of people in Vancouver can't afford the market rate rentals that are the vast majority of the targets. So they're building housing for people who are higher income that don't live in Vancouver. And they're doing that often by demolishing old affordable buildings. So in the theory that you're going to stop the rising of rents in general by increasing supply, which there's some mild measurable effects that it increases less when you build more housing. The strategy that's being pursued is you're building housing that 2/3 of people can't afford, and you're demolishing and getting rid of existing building that families and communities already live in that they can afford to do so. And yeah, 2/3 of people in Vancouver just genuinely cannot, according to census data, afford these rents. And that is the majority of the building work that's being done, and it's being done at the expense of existing affordable buildings which are being torn down to build those buildings. So I know that's a couple fun facts, but I think that the way that they lock together has a really interesting implication.
Yeah, it matches my experience of occasionally being like, oh, maybe I should move somewhere else. And then looking at rents and being like, oh yeah, I'm never moving anywhere else. I'm going to live in this apartment until they rent evict me or demolish the building. I don't know. I've never understood why, if you're talking about building units to help bring housing costs down, why you wouldn't sort of peg the rents of the units that you're building as being affordable for people at or below, and hopefully well below, median wages, because, like, you know, you need more for people at the middle and downward. Those are the people who have the most problems finding rentals. So, like, if you're building things that 75% can't afford, it doesn't make any sense. You would want to build things that the bottom 25, the bottom 50% can afford.
Yeah, and the justification for this stuff There's these studies that show that if you build new market, so basically the theory is you build new market rate apartments. People who are moving into town because they want to get like things like tech jobs or whatever, they work for mining companies. They buy those market units instead of buying the older units that people are in, instead of competing for these lower income older units. And there's some studies that show that there's something called a vacancy chain, where when you build these new market units, it creates a chain of people moving up, clearing up lower income units and so on. But there's two caveats to that, and I'm going to be done with fun facts because I'm actually just starting to soapbox again because I'm in election mode. And I mean, this was never much of a sketch in the first place. The two caveats to that are everyone in the vacancy chain who moves up to a new unit, so you have that new non-affordable unit that someone moves into, clearing up their old unit, someone moves into that unit, and so on, freeing up down the chain lower income units. Because each new tenancy can be set at market rents, everyone in that chain's rent goes up. No one's rent goes down from this process, ever, mathematically speaking. So that's caveat number one. And then caveat number two is that these same studies show that when you build what they call below market housing, what I would call social housing or affordable housing, the vacancy chain impact is greater because those people are freeing up more and cheaper units faster instead of having to trickle down from the top. The only issue is that in order to do that, you need to have a public housing program. You need to have government investment, and you need to be willing to get into the housing market at a loss, which is something that governments do. It's something that governments do on healthcare, and it's like when we look down at the US, it's the thing that makes us feel good about ourselves, is knowing that when you have a baby, it's never going to cost you $500,000 to go to the hospital. Well, was that because we increased the market supply of hospitals in Vancouver so much that now they have to compete to bid down with each other to give us the lowest price possible? No. We collect tax revenue from big corporations and we use that to pay for the healthcare. We should do the same thing with housing because housing is an essential thing. People who don't have housing die. And people who can't afford their housing, they have to leave, they have to be split from their families, they have to be split from their parents, split from their kids. They have to move away from the cemeteries where their grandparents are buried. They have to move away from the schools where they had their first kiss to make someone richer because they're rich. And the people who have to move because they're poor. And that's not the way that a city should be.
And that was Fun Facts. And now back to our show.
I mean, the other thing people keep on talking to us about when we're going out on the street and stuff is just like Ken Sim. You were assembling a list of like all these like controversies of Ken Sim, like this insanely long list for like how
I haven't. It'd be like an hour, an extra hour. Maybe that would be the bonus, like for the subscribers. Like,
yeah,
just reading down the whole list.
But yeah, like I don't know, off the top of your head, can you think of 20?
Oh boy. Yeah, let's give it a shot. Killed the renter's office.
Right. So that's supposed to help renters when they're facing evictions and stuff, and they got rid of it.
Yeah. He muzzled nonprofits. So essentially like tone police nonprofits like Yarrow. They are largely like a Chinatown seniors advocacy group. And one of their directors had said like, just because Ken Sim's Chinese doesn't mean he's like on your side. And they're like, oh, you can't say that. And you won't get any money from us if you say stuff like that.
Yeah, so nonprofits who speak out against the government lose their funding for services that people rely on.
They canceled a Van Du grant.
Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Gotta spell out my acronyms more often.
I'll play the role of, you just rattle through it. I'll play the role of making sure everyone has the context they need.
These two things are like in the first like week of them being in power too, by the way. So I'm almost going chronologically. They canceled a Van Du grant, like an art grant that was purely vindictive. And it was Montague, who's a cop who doesn't live in Vancouver, lives in North Van, who did it because he hates Van Du, because Van Du are openly critical of police violence and police overreach. He killed the livable wage for Vancouver workers. Civic workers would make I think it was like $26 an hour, or maybe it's even higher now. It's gone up since we've started the podcast. But like you pay these workers and they can afford to live in the city. And he got rid of that.
City policies, you had to pay people fair. He took that away.
They spent $500,000 to clear out Crab Park. So Crab Park, there was an encampment on the peninsula in East Vancouver, downtown Eastside Park. A judge had ordered that they were allowed to not only have like daylight camping, like where you just like every park you're allowed to like actually like have like camp as long as you strike down by a certain hour. They were allowed to stay in like their tents were allowed to stay set up by this judge because this judge said there's nowhere else for them to go. There's no other housing. There's no other option. And so, yeah, so they put gravel down and essentially like have rangers like 24/7, like police everything. They had to have like city issued tents. They had to have like couldn't have anything extra. Like I was there when they like started taking stuff away and they took away like a spice rack. Like how like weirdly colonial, like we know you guys hate spices and you're just like, I don't know.
They just want to take away everything.
Yeah.
Remotely nice.
Meisner said this was to make it dignified. $500,000 to clear out the tents. And now there's no one there. It's just a fenced off lot. And a lot of people are saying, well, this was done for optics, for either Invictus Games or Taylor Swift coming to town or FIFA, the aforementioned FIFA that's coming to town. And what's interesting about Crab Park is that it wouldn't exist without downtown Eastside activists actually camping out to demand an accessible park. So CRAB actually stands for Create a Real Available Beach. And activists fought for it, and it only exists because of a tent city. I think that's kind of fascinating.
So they spent $500,000 to clear out Crab Park, take all the poorest, most vulnerable people's personal possessions, including their ID and stuff, in these inhumane sweeps. And they spent $500,000 to do that.
Yeah. Speaking of sweeps, there was incredibly violent street sweep that they did on Hastings. So there was a lot of structures on Hastings. They said it was a fire hazard, and they claimed like propane tanks. Interestingly enough, the aforementioned Vandu, part of that grant was to actually like monitor those propane tanks. It's interesting. So they swept the whole thing in one day, where they provided all the neighboring nonprofits and housing agencies. They gave them like 24 hours notice, and then one of those people like leaked it to the media. And then they made like a media blackout. Like media was not allowed anywhere in this area to document the incredibly violent street sweeps that this was. I was down there. I was getting like punched in the ribs by the cops. They smashed this woman's like medicine shell, like for her tobacco. Indigenous women's, like that's like a hate crime just there. And then I'm not sure how much. I think the number came out on how much they spent on that, but I can't remember it. But they spent a lot of money to sweep these people. And then of course what happens is that they're dispersed around these different areas. Overdoses go up because you're using alone in a back alley rather than in this encampment. How many have I got?
We're at 6, so we're going to have to go through these fast, but I'll throw out some ones that I remember too. Is he took public meeting space at City Hall and turned it to a personal gym for himself. And he reads a little book that's about swagger that's visible in the photos in the newspaper. He said, it's not my job to crunch the numbers about FIFA, which is going to be this huge expense for the city next year. The $3.8 million that he gave back to developers from the empty homes tax is another one that's up to 9. I mean, the park board thing is huge. Like he actually campaigned on keeping the park board. He promised that he'd keep the park board when he was running. And then after he was elected, said, we're going to get rid of the park board because the park board chairs like disagreed with him on something. And it was like this weird vindictive, like, okay, I'm going to abolish an elected institution without a referendum or any sort of vote. So that brings us up to 10.
When they were like figuring out the budget, he asked like how libraries could monetize themselves properly.
Right. Yeah.
He illegally chugged beer in public in front of kids, while at the same time like demonizing like public drug use, but because it's the wrong drug, right? Also,
yeah, I'm cool with chugging beer in public in front of kids,
yeah.
But at the same time attacking drug users a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, this is a weird one where they like the province had like $1.8 million available for school lunch programs, and they just said no to that.
Don't want these kids dependent on free lunches.
Yeah.
It'll turn them into little socialists.
Disgusting. He was under investigation from the Integrity Commissioner and dismissed the Integrity Commissioner, which is outrageous. So as this happened, Pete Fry like filed 2 complaints to like keep the Integrity Commissioner going, and the commissioner found that the park board commissioners were like whipped behind closed doors, And this is a clear violation. Like every municipality in Canada, everything has to be done out in the open. It's not like provincial, like where you caucus and then like come and then debate on it, because we don't debate on it. You can't make these closed door decisions, essentially.
Violating democratic norms to stack votes and intimidate and threaten councillors who don't go along with them.
And then, yeah, you said dismissing a commissioner who was currently investigating him at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying, at least. It didn't happen.
They turned on non-circulating water fountains during the heat wave last year or like 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah, when there's like a drought. And
There's like a full drought, and these are non-circulating. So this is like we're just pouring drinking water into the sewers.
during a drought where you're not supposed to be having showers and stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
There's also the East Van Panto thing.
Oh, that was funny. So they had this like part in the play, and he went to it and just like this is like an attack on me, and so like he basically got them to like take it out of the play, and it was because like his house had been graffitied earlier.
Yeah, they had this play that they were parodying city politics, and they forced them to change it because they received some public money for their space or whatever. Because
so again, like leveraging public money to get people in unrelated organizations to do what he wants.
We talked about Holborn earlier in the Dunsmuir, but they're also the developer around the very controversial Little Mountain housing project. And the city council said that they don't have to do their social housing commitments.
Yeah, Little Mountain is a place where there was like a ton of social housing. Like in the 90s, it got sold off to a developer. It's been like this empty site forever. They want to make more profit there, and they waived social housing commitments for them. Another handout to their rich buds.
They dismissed the climate justice charter, and that's something that's like has like a really good like equity framework. It's like kind of part of this like DEI backlash too. Like Montague was just like, what does this mean? What is an equity toolkit? And just like took it as like an attack against him or something. And so they got rid of that.
Oh, and they pulled Vancouver out of the lawsuit against Big Oil for climate change, which had been committed to under the previous council. And they also tried to put methane, like fracked methane gas heating back into new buildings, which had been prevented under the previous council. And then he also has an LNG director on his, like one of his top staff people as like
lobbyist,
the head of a LNG company.
Oh yeah, speaking of lobbyists, he promised a lobbyist registry in the 2022 campaign and has failed to do that.
Yeah, even when it was raised by opposition parties.
The gas thing too, like he was on holiday or something, and he like flew back to like break the tie in the vote.
Oh yeah, and he talked about investing in Bitcoin when Bitcoin. They passed a motion to get the city to invest in Bitcoin when Bitcoin was at the highest price that it had ever been in history.
Yeah. He said he got orange pilled by it.
He got orange pilled, yeah. So not only is this some Bitcoin thing, I guess, but yeah, not only is it like probably just generally like a bad idea to invest in Bitcoin, but even through like a financial lens to be like, we're going to buy high with public funds because I love Bitcoin.
He restricted public access to council decision making by limiting like minutes. Like speakers are allowed to go and speak to council. It was 5 minutes. Now it's 3 minutes. And then councillors aren't allowed to like ask follow-up questions of the speakers. So sometimes it's people that are just like, go in and say stuff, but sometimes it's like actual experts that like you should be asking them follow-up questions because they're experts.
Yeah, no, they've done other stuff like that too on school board. They don't allow public comment anymore, and it's increasingly like closed door meetings that are supposed to be for like, you know, like when you're dealing with HR complaints or something, you have a closed door private meeting, and they're just putting everything behind it there, including that land sale of the basketball thing. So okay, we're at 22 now. We made it.
All right.
And what will you do, like, if you're elected in that same room, you're sitting around the table, Ken Sims on the other side, ABC councilors, you're one lonely leftist in the big table. What are you going to do? How are you going to make his life hell?
I'm going to make a motion to repeal every single one of these things on this list.
Like an omnibus?
Like a big, and then I'm going to filibuster it. No, I'm going to raise hell and just kind of act as a megaphone for social justice. Obviously, trying to convince, working with ABC and trying to convince these other counselors to find a conscience and not be whipped behind closed doors. So there is that. But there's also like, he killed the renter's office. I can't bring back the renter's office, but I can make my office the renter's office. I can sort of act as like, in a way, like propping open the door for 2026 and for just like open the door to City Hall for community groups to speak on important issues.
That reminds me also, we got reason to think that Ken Sim and ABC are afraid of you. Their chief of staff ran a Twitter ad at like 10:30 at night for a couple hours.
Yeah.
He ran a Twitter ad pushing a screenshot of one of your tweets where you had said, you know, the movement around defunding the police was always about reallocating to other services. And it's some like clarifying tweet that you'd said.
Yeah, it was just like, because like he was like, oh, Cope all of a sudden cares about property tax, because we were saying, you know, like your property taxes are going up, services are going down. And I said, yeah, well, that's always what defund the police was about. It was about reallocating those property taxes. He screenshot, ran it as an ad. And I just got all these texts. It was my partner's birthday, and I was actually like up at Scandinav in Whistler. Yes, I know. Bougie, champagne socialist, I get it. But self-care is also, you know,
it was your day off.
It was
I remember that.
I put it in the calendar, like my day off. Shawn not available all day. I get out of the hot tub and I'm just like, my phone is blowing up
because you couldn't resist the Twitter. The Twitter pulled you in. You said a comment to the chief of staff, and then he spent hundreds of dollars running it as a Twitter ad.
How much did he spend? Whose money was it? Why did he take it down? But then the ad kept had to fulfill its cycle, so it was just like the ad kept running, but it was just a deleted post.
Yeah, so if you clicked on it, it was like, this tweet has been deleted, but it was still being pushed to everyone's feed in Vancouver for like another hour after that. He's kind of also notoriously a little bit of a Tweedledee, that guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think even their choice at like running Ralph Kaiser's, the guy who kicked me out of the police union all candidates debate, even though I wasn't invited. I wonder why. He was the guy that kicked me out, but also not only just yeah, you have to leave. He's just he came up to me. He's like, don't you know who I am? Like that move. And I was just like, of course I know who he is. I was just like, no, are you important? And he got so mad. It was great. But I didn't even want to be there. It's a room full of cops, and it was kind of gross and intimidating anyways. And then I also had another event that day. It was Pints for Politics at UBC. I'm I'd way rather be at that event. So let's just do this quickly and get out of there. But they're running him against me. This is a guy who is potentially under investigation for interfering in a homicide investigation. I'm talking about the death of Miles Gray, where one police officer named Ralph Kaiser's as instructing him to not take notes and to not publish a statement, to not write a statement on it. So this is a guy who potentially, if things go terribly wrong, is elected to council and would have to take a leave of absence to go under investigation for this. But this is also a guy who's bullied Christine Boyle online. He's bullied Vision Zero, which is this really nice pedestrian safety group. There's the sweetest people, and he's bullied them online. He's posted imagery that said, fuck the downtown Eastside grifters. He's posted thin blue line imagery, which many police departments instruct their members not to wear. Calgary police, for example, don't allow their members to wear it. The RSMP aren't supposed to wear it. It's got deeply bigoted racist origins. And he's just out here. It's still up. He's proud of it. He's proud to be clearly a bigot. So that's another reason I think they're scared of me, and they're running this kind of bully to try and intimidate me, but I won't be intimidated.
Oh, yeah. Lots of... We could keep going, but we can't. We ran out of time. So you're running for city council. Mm-hmm. Election day is April 5th. Mm-hmm.
Advance voting April 26th and April 1st.
March
26th. Wow. No. Advance voting after the election. March 26th and April 1st at City Hall.
That's right. 8. Yeah, 8 to 8. And yeah, so if you're in Vancouver and want to get connected to Shawn's campaign, you can go to votecope.ca and reach out and be part of standing up to the billionaires who are trying to buy off our politics and politicians to make the government work for them instead of us. The same billionaires who are cooking our planet and supercharging the housing market to generate high rents and homelessness, and build a movement to fight against them, to fight against Ken Sim and take the city back for the rest of us on a platform of strong values for people. And Shawn is going to be the guy who can do it. We get him on city council. He's going to grill Ken Sim. He's going to grill ABC. And he's going to make their life hard for this next year and a half until we can get them out of office and evict Ken Sim in 2026. I just hit all those points in a row.
Amazing.
Hey?
Yeah. We got this.
That's like our message box.
No, that was awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for coming on the show. I
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
Oh yeah, and if you get elected, do you want to start a little podcast to like explain Vancouver history and contextualize all the weird stuff they're doing? I thought that would be kind of cool.
That'd be
It's
really
weird
cool,
to put you on the
actually,
spot, but
No, that'd be really cool, and like have kind of a thing where we could like interview various people that could be potential candidates too for 2026. You know what I mean? Like getting people in and just like having those conversations, but like just, building a movement, part of it, right? And I do love like the history. My mom's a historian, so I do like kind of gravitate towards that a lot. Yeah, I could talk about 1993. That can be the name of it.
1993.
Yeah, it was also the year Woodward's closed. It was also the year Riverview closed. It was the year that China White, this really pure version of heroin, was first introduced in the downtown East Side. It was
that was like the what was the word I told you not to say earlier?
Zenith.
Yeah, that was like
that was the zenith.
That was like the
1993 is the zenith.
That was the zenith of neoliberal austerity.
Maybe you should call the podcast The Zenith.
Oh, I love it.
Papa and boy.
Papa,
Yes, son.
I wanted to ask you a question, but I'm a little bit nervous because it's a bit embarrassing.
Oh boy, it's okay. You can ask me anything. You know, I'm an open book. I don't believe in hiding information from you.
You know, I'm just a boy, but I'm getting older now, and I'm growing, and I've started to pay more attention to Vancouver politics.
Right.
You know, I know we're a Cope family, but I was just wondering why. Like, what's so great about Cope?
That's a great question, son, and I'm happy to answer it. I really do believe in not hiding the truth. So, what makes Cope different? COPE, the Coalition of Progressive Electors, it was founded in 1968 as a coalition of environmentalists, labor groups, social justice groups. You know, basically to fight for, they didn't use the term then, but fight for the 99%, the vast majority of us, their interests against the interests of the rich. It's a very successful left-wing party. It's been electing people almost every election for 60 years. And a lot of left-wing parties don't do that. But the thing that is really important about COPE, the theory of change that COPE has that other parties don't have, is you have to demand what is needed, not just at the civic level, but the provincial, the federal level. And we think you can't win something unless you fight for it.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
This is our comedy sketch. It's like I'm just like so in campaign mode or whatever. It's like my idea for a comedy sketch is I'm just going to like talk about why COPE is great. It's like this is like Daily Wire comedy or something. It's like, Daddy, why are the Democrats so well? Good question, son. The Democrats are, I don't know. I'll be back to normal in a couple weeks.
Comedy, seriously wrong podcast.
Papa and boy.
All right, so that was the Seriously Wrong podcast.
Yeah, Shawn is now left. The other Shawn is left. So only one Shawn remains.
Sean Orr, not here. Sean Villiers is here.
I just want to say about Shawn, he's like a cool guy, right?
Yeah.
I like that guy a lot.
Yeah.
He
That was
knows
my first time meeting him, but it's a good impression, good first impression.
He also genuinely, like, of people that I know, he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know about Vancouver history and politics. Like, he's always contextualizing stuff, like context I didn't have. Like, he's got a big interest in history. It's always, really cool. But also, he's just like, cool guy.
Yeah, and in news about the podcast a little bit, we're going to be taking a short break. We're going to be off for a little while because Sean's brain is in a deep, deep groove that he can't climb his way out of, no matter how much he tries.
Yeah, so the election period's going to, like, we're recording this well into the pre-election period. And soon it's going to be the election period at that time. I'm going to be focusing like 100% of my energy on making this election work. And I'm pretty much there now, even though it's pre-election period. Like, I'm finding it hard to think of jokes. I'm just so in this political world. It's like my everyday, all my messages, every text I've sent in the last 3 weeks has been about this. Every phone call I've had in the last 3 weeks has been about this.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to make campaigns work. So yeah, we're going to take a little break, partially so I can focus on that, and partially just because I can't get onto other grooves enough to like do the show that we usually do. But we'll be back in April. We've lined up 3 really interesting interviews for April, and we've got a few really good episodes in the pipeline that we're stoked to share. But until now and then, we'll have a few little things on Patreon, mailbag, maybe a little update or something for our donors in this month and beginning of April. And we'll be back sometime in April with full featured, regular, Seriously Wrong.
Yeah, we're going to, take a break. And then when we're back, we'll hit the ground running again. We've been experimenting with more frequent releases recently, the mailbags, and also doing episodes a bit more quickly. And yeah, the plan is to keep doing that again when we get back. So there'll be lots of new episodes after the break.
Yeah, so sound off in the comments about, what's going on in Vancouver, especially if you're local to BC and stuff too. I'm really interested to hear. But if you're not local to BC, I hope there's some stuff here that is inspiring about what can be done at that local political level, and to use that as a way to fight for things, to fight for people, to challenge other levels of government, and to try to make life better for people and try to make cities places that you're proud to live. These places are our homes, and there's all these forces that are trying to make us accept that we can't stay here because we're not rich enough. I really think here in Vancouver, but elsewhere, there's a lot of places that are facing these housing pressures and stuff. We can put up an organized resistance that uses the civic realm as a means to get a foothold, to work with community groups, fight for things that are needed, like free, accessible public transit, affordable public housing, well-funded libraries, but also library economy stuff like lending libraries for bicycles, lending libraries for tools, computer recycling centers and stuff, to have an ecological politics and a democratic politics and a politics based on need at the civic level. I mean, that's what's exciting about this to me. That's why my brain is in this groove so much, is that there's really something here, and I think it's something that can be applied to a lot of places.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, and we will be back in just a few short weeks.
Thank you, everybody, and talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Seriously? Seriously?
Boys are stupid.
Seriously?
Wrong. Wrong. Wrong.
Seriously?
Are they wrong?
I think they're wrong 100%. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're wrong.
Seriously?
They're always wrong.
That is absolute
Wrong.
Seriously?
It's so wrong. Wrong. Very nice words, but happens to be wrong.
Seriously? Seriously? Seriously?
Wrong.